You're a softie in real life. You know, Slash, you could see some people misunderstanding and thinking you've got this dark image, but you love, like, one of the actors that you cast is a voice on SpongeBob. Is that right?
Yeah, Clancy Brown.
And which voice does he do?
Mr. Krabs.
They were the most dangerous band in the world, but behind the chaos of sold-out stadiums and record-breaking sales, a bitter feud was tearing Guns N' Roses apart. At the center of it all, Axl Rose and Slash. Fans thought the band was unstoppable, but the shocking truth is that by the mid-1990s, their partnership had collapsed. At 65, Slash finally admitted why he walked away, and the reason is more heartbreaking and more human than anyone imagined. By the late 1980s, Guns N' Roses had gone from a gritty Los Angeles club act to global rock gods. Their debut album, Appetite for Destruction, released in 1987, became the best-selling debut in U.S. history, propelled by hits like Sweet Child of Mine and Welcome to the Jungle. Slash, with his top hat, wild curls, and unmistakable Les Paul guitar tone, became one of the most recognizable figures in rock. But even in their earliest years of fame, cracks were forming. Axl Rose was the electrifying frontman, but also mercurial and demanding. He pushed the band toward experimentation, while Slash wanted to stick to raw, riff-driven rock and roll. The dynamic worked on stage, but behind the scenes, tensions grew. The massive Use Your Illusion albums in 1991 showcased this push and pull. Songs like November Rain revealed Axl's love for grand, orchestrated pieces, while Slash held the band to its hard rock roots. The albums sold millions, but the creative clash between the two men intensified. As the band toured the world to screaming fans, Slash and Axl were locked in a quiet battle over the band's future. And as the decade wore on, that battle would erupt into open conflict. By the early 1990s, Guns N' Roses was no longer just a band. It was an empire. They were headlining stadiums, living in excess, and constantly in the headlines for riots, walk-offs, and chaos. But the bigger they became, the deeper the divisions grew. Axl Rose began to exercise more control, both in the studio and on stage. Concerts often started hours late because he refused to come out until everything was perfect, leaving fans frustrated and the band strained. Slash, who prided himself on being dependable and grounded in the music, grew increasingly angry. The breaking point came when Axl began steering Guns N' Roses toward a new sound. He wanted more electronic elements, more experimentation, and less of the raw guitar-driven identity that had defined their success. For Slash, this was a betrayal of everything the band stood for. In interviews years later, he admitted bluntly, "I just couldn't deal with it anymore. It stopped being about the music. The clash wasn't just about style, it was about identity, ego, and control. And it set the stage for Slash's shocking decision to walk away from one of the biggest bands in the world." The breaking point came during the making of what would become Chinese Democracy. While Slash wanted the band to continue writing in the gritty, blues-infused hard rock style that made them famous, Axl Rose envisioned something very different. An epic project with industrial influences, layered production, and years of perfectionist tinkering. Slash found himself sidelined, his guitar parts cut or replaced, and his creative voice diminished. For a man who had helped define the sound of Guns N' Roses, it was devastating. In 1996, he finally decided he couldn't go on. He officially left the band, writing in his autobiography that Guns N' Roses had become Axl's solo project with hired guns. The split shocked fans worldwide. One of rock's most iconic partnerships, the voice and the guitar, was over. For years, Slash avoided even talking to Axl. Their feud became one of the most infamous in rock history, with rumors, insults, and bitterness dominating headlines. At the time, no one believed they would ever share a stage again. The years after Slash's departure were defined by chaos. Guns N' Roses, under Axl's leadership, spiraled into delays and lineup changes, spending more than a decade and millions of dollars on the troubled Chinese Democracy album. When it was finally released in 2008, Slash was nowhere to be found. Meanwhile, Slash pursued his own projects, forming Slash's Snake Pit, later Velvet Revolver, and eventually releasing solo work. His career thrived, But the shadow of Guns N' Roses loomed large. Fans constantly asked if he and Axl would ever reunite, but the bitterness between them only seemed to grow deeper. Axl didn't hold back his feelings either. In one interview, he referred to Slash as a cancer, words that shocked even longtime fans of the band. For his part, Slash admitted the rift had gone too far, saying reconciliation seemed impossible. The feud became legendary, not just about two men, but about what happens when egos, creative visions, and the pressures of fame collide. The breakup of Slash and Guns N' Roses left fans devastated. In the mid-1990s, the band was at the peak of its fame, and suddenly, the magic that had defined songs like Paradise City and Sweet Child of Mine was gone. Concert attendance began to dwindle, and critics questioned whether Guns N' Roses could even survive without Slash's iconic riffs. The release of Chinese Democracy in 2008, more than a decade after Slash's departure, only confirmed fans' fears. While the album had some success, it lacked the chemistry and raw energy of the classic lineup. Many saw it as proof that the heart of Guns N' Roses had been lost. For Slash, however, the split opened doors. Velvet Revolver won a Grammy in 2005, and his solo career earned him respect as one of rock's most consistent guitar heroes. Yet no matter how successful he became, fans always asked about Guns N' Roses and about Axl. Public reaction to the feud was divided. Some sided with Axl, admiring his determination to control the band, but many more sympathized with Slash, seeing him as the steady hand pushed away by chaos. The feud itself became almost as famous as the band's music, a reminder of how fragile even the biggest rock empires can be. By the 2010s, years of bitterness had taken their toll. Both Slash and Axl avoided each other, living separate lives in music. But time has a way of softening even the deepest wounds. In 2016, fans were stunned when Guns N' Roses announced that Slash and Axl were reuniting for the Not in This Lifetime tour. It was a moment few thought possible. The chemistry that once seemed shattered was reborn on stage. The tour became one of the highest grossing in history, pulling in more than $580 million and reminding the world of why their partnership had mattered so much in the first place. At 65, Slash has reflected on the feud with a sense of closure. He admitted that walking away was the only choice he could make at the time, but also that the reunion gave him a second chance to reconnect with the music and the fans. The bitterness of the past no longer defines him. Instead, the story of Guns N' Roses has become one of collapse and redemption, proof that even broken bonds can be rebuilt. For Slash, the decision to leave was painful, but necessary. He has admitted in later interviews that he couldn't function under the direction the band was heading, and yet his honesty and refusal to compromise preserved his own artistry. Axl, meanwhile, carried on with Guns N' Roses in his own way, but even he eventually realized that something essential was missing without Slash. Thanks for watching. Click here to check another video and make sure to subscribe to our channel.